Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. With your kind agreement, I would like to urge you to take a seat. Please, the time is precious.
And I was saying, well, it's a little too late.
Very good morning, and let me introduce you to the panel. We will have a discussion on state of democracy in Eastern Partnership from individual to public interest. And I'm quite delighted to announce that we have a slight change in our panel composition, which is a very pleasant one. We will have Commissioner Füle with us, who is going to speak among other speakers. So then let me introduce you to Mr. Andrius Kubilius, leader of the opposition of the parliament and former Prime Minister of Lithuania. So the next comes Mr. Bruce Jackson, President of Project on Traditional Democracies, the United States of America. So then we have Mr. István Germati, Ambassador, President of ICDT, Hungary. So then Mr. Petr Mareš, Ambassador, Special Envoy for Eastern Partnership, the Czech Republic. So then we have Ms. Nadia Duke, Vice President, Programs, the USA. Then I see Professor Guy Nodia, Director of the International School of Caucasus Studies, Ilia State University, Georgia. And finally, Ms. Alona Getmanchuk, Director, Institute of World Politics, Ukraine. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and a great privilege. And let me tell you very briefly that the topic of this panel discussion is very far from banal. In fact, civil society appears as one of the most difficult things in world politics and international relations. We tend to take it for granted as a bunch of NGOs and activists in each society, yet things are far more complicated. Let me remind you very briefly that when Eastern Europe became truly independent, Lord Dahrendorf made a wonderful attempt to explore the space of this imagined freedom, writing a book which was the imagined dialogue with the Polish gentleman, and the book was the Reflections on the Revolution in Europe. And Ralph Dahrendorf offered his insight into the nature of change by saying that you would need 6 months, roughly, to introduce good legislation for making the free market economy work. You would need 6 years of normal practices and pieces of legislation to make a liberal democracy work. But you would need even more than 60 years to achieve civil society. So another insight comes from Ernest Gellner, who says, imagine if the state collapses, and if some forms of civilized life are still there, that's civil society. This is how it works. Parishes, universities, businesses, people who establish foundations, who have a strategic vision for the future of the country, they are inseparable. Such components as transparency, awareness, strategic evaluation and assessment of things happening in society, all those things are indispensable for liberal democracy. Where are we now? Eastern Partnership is, for instance, the fact that we are disenchanted with the political class, which happens to be very far from good in some countries. Is it an excuse for being complacent, for doing nothing? That's a pivotal question. Let me suggest the following format. 5 minutes for each panelist, and then we will have a debate. We have an hour with Commissioner Füle. Time is very precious. I urge the audience to be very straight and active. After the first leg, please do come up with your questions and comments, and our panelists will respond immediately. Commissioner Füle, you. What do you think about this unique situation in terms of civil society? Interlocutors, political forces, political class, you know everything what's happening in Eastern and Central Europe. And yet, civil society, something underneath and something pivotal.
Two things. First, I don't know everything. And second, let's stick to what we have agreed. I already had my chance to talk to you, to address you. Now we have a qualified panelist. Let's give them the opportunity. And it will be my great pleasure, if you have any questions, I could be a part of answering it to do that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Then, if so, the floor goes to Mr. Andrius Kubilius.
Yeah. Good morning to everybody, and thanks, Leonidas, for introductory remarks. Well, I think that really when we're speaking about civil society, we're speaking about power of the people. And well, being here in this hall, I think it's very symbolic for me personally to speak about power of the people, because when you will leave this building, you can look just across the square where 22 years ago still Lenin monument was here, showing with his fingers, with his hand, to KGB building. Just now it's totally different. We have no Lenin monument, and in the KGB building we have a monument how Lithuanian people were fighting for freedom during Soviet occupation period of time. So, and today when we are here, really, we can see different developments in Eastern or in our region, and those different developments are very much symbolically can be named different developments, how power of the people can be realized. So we have brave people from Kiev right here in our audience. I would like to congratulate them with what they are doing just now in Maidan Square, because in my opinion, in Maidan Square, decisions are made not only about the future of Ukraine, but also about the future of Russia and Europe itself. That is the power of the people, and I hope and I would like to wish that really all the success would come to the people of Ukraine through their activities in Maidan Square. Yesterday we had in our parliament parliamentary hearings on human rights situation in our neighboring country, Belarus. And really listening to the wives of political prisoners, to mothers of political prisoners, when they are speaking about terrible situation of political prisoners in the middle, almost in the middle of Europe, when only per year they have only 2 occasions to meet their husbands or their sons, when some of them are kept in such a condition that for half a year they cannot see the light of the sun. So then you understand very well what we are speaking about. And it's obvious that such regimes, which are so afraid of the power of people, are really very weak regimes. So, and that is what we need to see also as a very clear conclusion from what is happening around. And the last point. I was here in Lithuania 2 times Prime Minister, still not in jail. That is, in our region, achievement, some kind of achievement. But I'm always saying, and our luck was that from the very beginning, we understood that the quality of democracy depends on one side on the power of the people, on another side on the will of politicians to strengthen, institutionally to strengthen democracy. Democracy cannot be with one leg when the government is very strong and opposition is persecuted. Just recently I had a meeting with a new speaker of the Georgian parliament, and I said, are you preparing yourself to become a leader of opposition? Because that is democracy, how it works. When you are in power, you should think in a very clear way that time will come when you will be leader of opposition, and if you are not taking care just now about rules and regulations, how to strengthen opposition, role, you will be in a much worse situation when you will be in opposition. That is a very simple message from leader of opposition of Lithuanian parliament, who was 2 times Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Bruce Jackson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to preface my remarks by wishing everybody happy Thanksgiving. It is a very important day in America where we get together with our families, we give thanks, and we remember at least two important things: how boring American football actually is, and how much we cannot stand our relatives. As the European community gathers itself, its family gathers in Vilnius today and invites its Eastern relatives, and since you don't have football, I think it's perfectly appropriate we discuss how strange and odd your Eastern relatives actually are. And if we ask about the state of the Eastern democracies that are within the partnership, the best thing we can say is it's not very good. And that would, frankly, the Eastern democracies or the Eastern partners are not European democracies. And that's the first exceptional thing about the Eastern Partnership. It's the first program that was ever designed in Europe that did not rely on integration to succeed. It basically was agnostic on the fact of where these countries would go, how they would develop, and prepared certain preparations in order for them to find their way. So when we basically take the metrics of how we evaluate our own democracies and apply them to the East, we get very strange readings. If we take pluralism, diversity, toleration of dissent, and looked at them all against each other, you'd probably have to conclude that Ukraine is the most advanced democracy in the East. It certainly has had more free and fair elections than, say, Georgia. It has fewer communists than, say, Moldova. It tolerates more dissent than Azerbaijan, certainly, frankly, more than America would tolerate. We wouldn't have demonstrations in Washington for a week. But those metrics lead you to the opposite of the real conclusion, and forces us and the leaders of the Eastern Partnership to look at the development of democracies in the East in a different way, and search to find out why they do what they do. If you look at the parliament in, say, Ukraine, it has great diversity, but it's the diversity of a fight club, not of a parliament. So these democracies are clearly developing in a different manner, and it forces us to look more closely inside. It forces us to look at the constituency, the youth, and in this sense, the visa-free travel is basically addressing democracies in a different way, not looking for metrics to basically look at ourselves in the mirror, but basically provide constituents in these new countries with the tools that they need. And I think that's the second exceptional part. It seems to me that what we're looking at, the glacial pace at which some of these countries are developing, is reflective of the geoeconomic change is preceding political change. Political change seems to be delayed. And in that sense, I think as we sort of pass this mid-mark point in the summit and head towards Riga, I think we're going to start looking at further changes in how we look at democracy developing in the East. I think our ideas about the exportability of political values have to be reconsidered. Our policies have not created as easily as we thought the instruments and institutions which have the capacity to influence countries. And so we'll have to rethink that thing. There'll obviously be a far greater modesty about our ambitions and even our rhetoric. It seems to me that Stefan Fili has already made the central point that engagement must take place over an extended periods of time and occur at the constituent level, which are the youth, at the level of households, and at the level of business. The second exceptional thing about what Carl Bildt and Radek Sikorski and Stefan and others in this room conceived of is it also has within it economic tools, which is rather rare when you look at that to bind them into the idea of democracy. And that seems to me, the reason for that is that economic change tends to precede the change in political consciousness, not the other way around. Much in the same manner that maritime law preceded common law in England, and Adam Smith and David Ricardo preceded Jefferson, getting down to the economic level. And it's interesting that the issues that are at the fore about Ukraine's decision were rather largely economic in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I think now as we go forward, and the Eastern Partnership has only existed for 4 years, I think this is a stage where it's basically learning the skills that will ultimately make it successful. Let me stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruce. And now the floor is for Mr. Istvan Garmati. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. In 5 minutes, it's very difficult to deliver a comprehensive evaluation,
6 or 7,
including
if something happens. 6, okay.
5.5. Okay. Nevertheless, I think we really need to try. But the conclusion for me is that I don't want to deliver a comprehensive assessment. I want to concentrate basically on 2 issues in my related, very much related issues, but separate issues. The one is how we address this defeat that we have suffered with Ukraine in the past 5 days. Is the EU incapable of dealing with these issues? So, is it a triumph for sheer force, blackmail by President Putin? I think that would be a wrong conclusion. It would be a wrong conclusion, although I'm pretty much convinced that, as my previous speakers also mentioned, that what we see now in the EU Eastern Partnership Russia triangle is probably the, I wanted to use the word war because I'm coming from the defense establishment, but it's one of the, if not the decisive competition between Europe and Russia. Decisive competition not only about Ukraine, not only about Belarus, about Moldova, but also about Russia. The outcome and our behavior will to a large extent determine what happens not only in the Eastern Partnership countries, but also in our relations with Russia. And if we consider these things, I think we have to come to the conclusion that it would be a big mistake to respond to the Russian blackmail in kind. That would be a big mistake to engage into a Persian or Arab bazaar competition. Who offers more to Ukraine, more money to Ukraine? I'm very much convinced that this decision of the current Ukrainian government will not last long, and our major ally in this competition is called President Putin, because the Ukrainian government, even the government, will see that what Russia has on offer may be lower oil prices for a while, but a much worse perspective for the long-term good of the Ukrainian people. So I think what we need to do is continue what we have been doing with Ukraine, continue it more vigorously, to be more alert vis-à-vis Russia, to get rid of our
Does it work? No, it does. If it doesn't, so then please use my microphone. Yep.
Thank you. I hated this anyway. It looked like an electric chair. Anyway, so to get rid of our illusions of Russia becoming a strategic partner of the European Union, but we should not give up, not only on Ukraine, but also not on Russia, but achieve it in a different way. Much more soft power, as it's so fashionable to say, much more decisive, much more concrete, to show the advantages of cooperation with the European Union. And also I would suggest to show the perspective. The Eastern Partnership, contrary to the intentions of its initiators, is basically a dead-end street. It does not end in the perspective of membership. And I think we should strengthen this perspective, because if people look at the Eastern Partnership Association, what does it mean association without the perspective of membership? I think we should move towards that and accelerate this process rather than slow down because of the failure or the defeat with Ukraine. My second point is about civil society. I have a theory that I made up, unfortunately also covering my own country and many others. And this theory says that the further away you go from Vienna and to the south and to the east, the bigger the gap becomes between legislation and implementation. And if you look at the Eastern Partnership countries, you will see that political elites in many Eastern Partnership countries, or Western Balkan countries for that matter, want to have an EU-compatible legislation and EU-compatible practice. I'm talking about elites, not necessarily about the ruling class. But But the implementation is very different. We have a big gap between the legislation which is EU compatible in many countries and the implementation. And the key to closing this gap is the civil society. The key is the civil society to force governments not only to approve legislation in parliaments, but also to implement it, which means getting rid of large-scale corruption, curbing the influence of the oligarchs. You will never get rid of them, but curbing the influence of oligarchs, etc. And my last point relates to this in really 2 sentences. The EU has to be more visible, because it's easy to talk to governments, it's much more difficult to talk to civil society. And the European Union has not been very good in talking to civil society. Especially not, we know the elites of the civil society, and we talk to them because they say what we want to hear. But let's talk to them who don't know, because they will decide the elections. And for that, we need to show results. And if we tell them that, okay, Moldovans, you will get DCFTA and visa-free entry to the European Union countries in 1 year, it's not very appealing. Why does it take 1 year? The next elections will not be determined what happens in 1 year, but what happens now. So I think the EU should move on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Petr Maric.
Well, let's try whether this works. You know, Janos, it's not about geography. Well, Prague is westward from Vienna, and, well, as for the rule of law, okay. There is a popular saying in my country about the difference about the attitude of the European Union and Russia. We say that if Russia makes an offer, it's very difficult to reject it. And if the EU makes an offer, it's very difficult to understand it. And that's how it is. Well, I heard during the last several days, when we all were so deeply involved in discussions, why not everything goes as well as we expected in some of the countries of the Eastern Partnership. And some of the solution offered by some of my friends, colleagues, and partners was actually to make this European offer more simple. But I don't think it is the way. It's impossible. It's impossible because we are a very complicated structure, and because the democracy is very complicated. I'm a historian by my profession, and if you look back through the years and centuries, you would always find that it's much more simple for a totalitarian regime or autocratic regime to compete with democracy. We witnessed it in the 30s, we witnessed it in the 50s, we witnessed it well, many times. So it's not about simplifying our offer. It's about our partners to get used to the complications of our offer. And this is about civil society first of all. And I appreciate very much this Dahrendorf quotation, because I believe during the last several days we always were thinking about Dahrendorf. It's not only about time we need to recreate or create democratic society, it's also about this active freedom he talks about. The road to democracy is not the only possible way of development. And to keep this road, to follow this road, we need civil society. We need people who are able to live in active freedom. And there is a practical advice from this point of view. We speak a lot, and I completely agree with István about this final goal, somewhere at the end of the tunnel, when the big doors will be opened for our Eastern partners. But in between, there are many smaller windows of opportunity. And I'm talking about education programs and agencies of the European Union, about research and development, about cultural programs. And if you look at the activities of our partners, both civil society and governments, you found out that they do not spend so much time trying to get inside through these small windows of opportunities. But they are extremely important. They are extremely important because they would help society in partners' countries to understand our very complicated offer. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for observing your time and for being very, very direct and straight. Thank you. Miss Nadia Duke.
Thank you for introducing me. I have a feeling that you, when you were introducing me, you said Nadia Duke, Vice President, United States.
No. I just indicated your geographical...
I'd just like to explain
location,
that,
so to say, but not your office. So your office
I don't
does not
look
need
like
to
Joe
that.
Biden, and I hope that if the ambassador, if the lady ambassador, if she's there, will convey that it wasn't me. Just wanted to point out my organization is National Endowment for Democracy. We have been working in Eastern Europe that then turned into Central Europe and also in many of the countries, all of the countries of the Eastern Partnership now for many years. I like very much the title of this conference, which includes the words reality check. Compliments to the organizers that as they were organizing the conference, they thought of this phrase, because I think in the last week, this reality check has really resonated loud and strong, where on the European side, it's been like a cold shower of people going to Ukraine and realizing, learning some things about the government that they're negotiating with, that these are people, not civil society, but people who are basically actually speaking a different language from them. On one side, you hear phrases like human rights, developing democracy. There's some excellent remarks today along those lines. On the other side, the vocabulary is feeling comfortable with the path. Somehow, I think Mr. Cox today mentioned a bidding process. Well, I think we know what that was referring to. What is in it in terms of financial compensation for the ruling elite to feel comfortable somehow, and one could go on. That has been a reality check and a cold shower for everyone. I think that's something that we've learned through this process. But I would suggest that we, as has been mentioned in slightly different forms here already, we should not change the language. That it really should be, if this is European civilization, there is a language, there is a vocabulary, that everyone should learn that vocabulary. Which just brings me to another point. I think it's becoming obvious how important Ukraine is in all of this process, and that maybe more attention should have been paid to bring the leaders along, maybe more attention should have been paid to the country before. But also I'd like to highlight why Ukraine is important from a different point of view. That, of course, President Putin wants to bring Ukraine into the customs union, which, of course, Ukrainians are being very reluctant. But for President Putin, this is a civilizational issue. Ukraine is part of a threesome of countries, a trinity, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, that is somehow a sort of Slavic civilization, and the argument goes, and the argument comes from the Kremlin and from Moscow very loud and strong, that somehow democracy is not suitable for this Slavic brotherhood of nations, and bringing Ukraine into Europe would certainly drive a sort of stake through the heart of that argument once and for all, because Ukraine started off in Europe in 1654. Ukrainian leaders signed away their whatever independence they had, for the historians in the room, and it's time that Ukraine went back. I don't want to downplay the importance of the other countries in the Eastern Partnership, because if we're looking at civil society, we should take stock of what's been achieved so far, pointing particularly to Georgia and to Moldova, where civic movements really were the driving force that have brought Georgia and Moldova to the place they are today for initialing. Even though we had the Rose Revolution, there was the so-called revolution in Moldova, maybe they haven't yet produced the kind of quality of democracy that everybody wants. But it's interesting that those two countries where there were civic protests, civic movements, those are the two other countries that are now in line for initialing agreements with the EU. So we should acknowledge that this type of movement led by civil society groups moves things along the road to the path to democracy. Also, I just want to remind everyone here, it's a kind of awkward speaking to a room full of civic activists, to remind everyone how important civil society is in these 6 countries, maybe in a way that Europeans don't quite appreciate, because Europe has fully formed democracies, government does its job, civil society does its job, but in these 6 countries, civil society actually is asked to do a lot. They're asked to hold government accountable. They're in fact taking the place of government in some cases, and I would also argue that they're taking the place in some way of political parties too. I noted with interest what was happening on the Ukrainian Maidan in Kyiv the other day, where it started off with 2 Maidans, and then the political leaders acknowledged that they should remove their political banners and join with the other Maidan that was led by civic groups with no particular political affiliation. And that is an acknowledgement that in fact, political parties play a different role in these 6 countries, and also civil society is an enormous force that shouldn't be underestimated. So what should we do? Well, maybe Europe should redefine its approach to civil society in these 6 countries, give the civil society people more of a decision-making role. I know that we have the national platforms, they're very important, but maybe there should be more for the civil society efforts. We appreciate that visa restrictions have been put forward for Moldova. I think that would be good to extend. Not only for Moldova, maybe Georgia, but also I don't want us to forget the other countries. Armenia, whose arm was twisted very severely to join the customs union, but also Azerbaijan and Belarus, where there are civil society people still struggling, where there are, in fact, I've heard some discussion about political prisoners of conscience today. We shouldn't forget about people like Alice Bialatsky, still in prison, Ilgar Mamyedov, Anar Mamedli, an election monitor who is under severe repression right now. We should be paying attention to them. So, just a final plea let's reconsider what civil society really is in these countries and how important it is for the development of the EU and democracy as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much for getting straight to the point. And for now, I have a pleasure of giving the floor to Professor Gianodia, who can speak in the capacity of ex-Minister of Education and as a political commentator as well. Professor Nodia.
When we speak about state of democracy in our countries or fight to conduct work,
if it doesn't work, Professor, so then just
have to. Okay, thank you. So on this topic, we probably on state of democracy in our countries, we speak maybe on intersection of 3 factors or in some kind of triangle. On the one hand, we have political decisions and institutions and practices in each of our countries, which are very different from each other, of course. Then we speak about European framework and transformative power of Europe.
And EaP is, in great part at least, about Europe helping us to become more democratic. That's why we are here, and that's why we are having this panel this morning. But then there is very important intermediary factor, which is commitment of each country to being European. How European we feel, how important it is for us to be part of Europe. And that is sometimes underappreciated, but that's a decisive factor, because unless we want to be part of Europe, Europe has no leverage. If we don't care about Europe, then whatever Europe recommends, we can just ignore. And I mean, and Europe has been extremely successful in Eastern and Central Europe, in Baltic states, because there the commitment to being European was very strong and clear. Now this EaP region is kind of fault-line region, where we have ambiguity on both sides. On the European side, there is sometimes a lukewarm attitude to this part of the world. There are EaP enthusiasts, but also EaP skeptics. We all know that, and we understand that. But also in our countries, there are very different attitudes from one country to another towards being European, how important it is. And of course, these days we also think and speak about Ukraine, and the Ukrainian case reminds us how important it is. There is some kind of cultural fault line within Ukraine, and party of regions, which is in power, is not really enthusiastic so much on European Ukraine. And we somehow downplayed that, but it is important. So in that vein, I would say that Georgia, among other EaP countries, have kind of comparative advantage in the sense that our commitment towards European choice have been quite consistent, and I would say more consistent than in other countries. Of course, we also have our own, anti-Europeans, let's say so, and some backlash against Europe, but still, the dominant part of the public, as showed by all opinion polls, is strongly in favor of European integration. And although there are some kind of pro-Russian parties as well, but very weak, so the whole political spectrum, government and opposition, is strongly pro-European. And although our politics, our internal politics, are very kind of combative and nasty sometimes, still on this point everybody agrees. And that makes a difference. Of course, this European commitment does not automatically translate into strong consolidated democracy and democratic institutions. We have lots of problems in that area, but still I think within the EaP framework, within this group of countries, we are sort of not so bad. We look somewhat better, and that it correlates with our European choice. Without having this European choice, I think it would be much more difficult to tame autocratic instincts of our governments, this one or previous one, or the one which was even earlier, because our domestic institutions or Georgia's political traditions are not strong enough to create a system of checks and balances which is paramount to every democracy, but this European choice is important containing factor. So if I do not have time to expand on the real state of democracy, where we stand in Georgia, I cannot speak in details. We have a mixed picture. There are good news. For instance, we had quite decent presidential elections recently, at least by standards of our regions. They were quite good. Our courts display a new trend of greater independence, which is extremely important. We have much greater pluralism, political pluralism. Opposition is much stronger than before. Media is much more diverse. But we have bad news. We have politics of vengeance. We have a trend of selective justice. We have, I would say, new trend of opacity of power, when we had a prime minister who just resigned, but is in a position to pull strings and play kind of Deng Xiaoping figure. We don't know whether he will or not, but he is in position to do that, which is already a cause of concern. But having said that, I think this Georgia is a region where Europe matters, where Europe's transformative power is there. And that's very important. So continuing involvement of Europe is very important factor of Georgia's democratic development. And in this, of course, we are very concerned about what's happening in Ukraine. Yesterday we had also very interesting and lively session of parliament where both factions could not agree on exact wording of the declaration, but everybody had the Ukrainian, Georgian, and European flags, which was very important kind of symbolism. But of course there are fears that on the one hand, after Ukrainian kind of turnaround, Russia will focus on pressuring us, because if Putin had some success with Yanukovych, his appetite may get greater, and he may try to pressure Georgia and Moldova, and there is lots of concerns about that. But there is also a fear that, because Ukraine is so central to EaP, without EaP, Europe will even lose interest to EaP even more. So without Ukraine, just Georgia, and if EaP about Georgia and Moldova, primarily it's not worth caring about. So of course, it's very important for us to show that European involvement and European interest is really kept.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we will be finishing the first phase with Ms. Alona Getmanchuk. Yes, please. No, okay. Please take mine.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here in such an important day for my country, for Ukraine. It was supposed to be a crucial day, but it's still another important day in the eve of another important summit. Being in Vilnius, I'm once convinced that even if European Union tries to create a similar approach to all EaP countries, we got different approaches to different countries. We have countries which were conventionally called Mr. No, like Belarus and Azerbaijan, Mr. Yes, like Moldova and partly Georgia, and Ukraine as Mr. If, because it always put forward conditions, unfortunately. Anyway, I agree with Gia Nodia that the timing and the place for such discussion about state of democracy is really appropriate. I fully agree, and I've been always convinced that for Ukraine, as well as for some other Eastern Partnership countries, democratization became a synonym to European integration. The striking evidence of this is the fact that countries that are the most committed to European integration, like Moldova, for example, are demonstrating the biggest progress in terms of democratic development. And I would dare even to say that without European integration, we will have a lot of problems with democratic developments in Ukraine. Even now, it's not difficult to predict that without dialogue, intensive dialogue with European Union, the next presidential election in Ukraine will be less free and fair. There will be more pressure on media. There will be more bans for organizing peaceful protest, bans from local courts. Regarding the current state of affairs, the situation is mixed, is not black and white. On the one hand, there is a government with still and very often plays with rules, not by rules. Maybe it's the first time in Ukrainian history when president has total control over all branches of power, judiciary, executive, legislative. On the other hand, thanks to the Ukrainian government decision to postpone the European integration process, we received a clear evidence of political awareness of the society, ability of self-organization. To be honest, half a year ago, even the most famous Ukrainian political analysts and sociologists could not predict that more than 100,000 people would go into the street only in Kiev to defend the country European choice. And already a few months ago, people were ready to go into the street, but people were ready to go into the street only to defend, for example, or to avoid deterioration of their living standards or unemployment. In Ukraine today, we have to be aware that 41% of people still regret about Soviet Union collapse. 56% don't believe that if they go to the street, they can change something. And 30% still don't want to go into the street because of fear of repression. So that's a real achievement that so many people go into the street and in order to defend European choice of the country. Situation is also not black and white because 60% of Ukrainians actually believe that Ukraine needs more the so-called strong hand than democracy. And on the other hand, 40% believe that Ukraine needs more the freedom of speech than censorship. So we still have a sort of democracy, I would say, democracy with some elements of dictatorships because people are ready to support both and simultaneously free and fair election, for example, and some elements of dictatorship like strong hand. It happens because democracy in Ukraine is still associated with a weak leadership and non-effective governance. And it's not only about Ukraine. I know that in some other Eastern Partnership countries, people also believe that we have to choose between effective governance and democracy. And that is another reason why European integration is so important for democratization, because it offers the possibility to build effective governance in a transparent and accountable manner. To sum up, I'd like to emphasize also 3 ideas addressed to European Union. First, since the main contribution to democratic developments goes from civil society, EU should put more efforts to help civil society in Eastern Partnership countries to become more sustainable and powerful. And it is not all about funding. Aside from funding, the best way to create a strong and responsible civil society is to help them, and I believe European Union is able to do that, to be more involved in the decision-making process and to be part of this process. Second, from my own experience, the most powerful tool to Europeanize decision-makers and society is the socialization, especially when it involves middle-range professionals within the institutions. And last but not least, the EU should recalibrate its policy in the Eastern Partnership by introducing intermediate milestones that would be rewarded. And finally, I would like to make a small announcement that immediately after the second panel, we are going to have informal ceremony of civil society signing of association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. By this signing, we would like to send a message that yes, Ukrainian government is not able today to sign association agreement. Ukrainian president is not able, but civil society is able, is ready to sign and implement those parts of the agreement we are able to implement. So everybody is invited to visit this ceremony. Thank you.
Yes, with this beau geste, with this beautiful gesture, I would like to finish the first phase, and then please raise your hands. Who would like to ask a question? Yes, I see quite a few people. I will bring the mic to you. And then please present yourself, introduce yourself, and please say to whom you would like to raise a question. Okay. Yeah, the lady.
Thank you. My name is Milica Pešić. I am from Media Diversity Institute, London. My question is very much related to what Alyona, the lady from Ukraine, just said. It seems that there is a difference between civic society and civic society organizations. These are two different things. And sometimes we equate the two. It seems also that civil society organizations in Eastern Partnership countries have much better relationship with the European Union than with their own governments. What do you think, particularly people from Georgia and Ukraine, but the other speakers, please, how can actually civil societies become not only representatives of urban parts of their societies, but really the citizens, and how you can help them actually really communicate and push their governments to listen to the citizens? Thank you.
Thank you. I would propose to collect a couple of questions, okay? That would be more productive. In the meantime, I would propose to come up with more questions and we will pick them up and then we'll distribute among our speakers. Please emphasize who is expected to answer your question, okay? So that is the crucial point. And please do remember, we have Commissioner with us, and time is very precious. If you would like to raise a question to Commissioner Füle, please let us know. So the mic is there, and then, yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Rasul Jafar from Azerbaijan. My question is to Commissioner Füle, and I'm interested about the thoughts of Mr. Füle on human rights situation in Azerbaijan when we had very obvious falsified elections on October 9, and when we have 140 political cases, and compared to Belarus, it's a double or even third time more cases. And I'm also interested the thoughts of Mr. Füle about how the EU is going to continue the work in Azerbaijan, how they are going to change actually to the situation in Azerbaijan. We know that we also have to do many things, but we also expect some things from the EU, and I want to raise the issue of Ilgar Mammadov, who is the chairman of Republican Alternative Movement, and Mr. Füle knows this case very well, but unfortunately we can't see the same activism what we've seen before. So, and the finally last thing in what I'm interested is applying of individual sanctions to those persons who directly or indirectly involved in human rights violations. And do you think that the argument that the sanctions in Belarus didn't work, it means it will not work in Azerbaijan, is a weak argument, because Azerbaijan and Belarus has totally different economic
Please try to wrap it up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and please do remember, ladies and gentlemen, very brief questions, not a long comment, please, because time is very precious. The next one.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is to Commissioner Füle. Your Excellency, the national platform is absolutely appreciated your fast forward, support of Republic of Moldova. We absolutely realize that this is an advance, and there is a lot to do in Moldova in terms of raising transparency of decision maker, fighting corruption, and of course reforming the judiciary system. Right now I have another question, because I receive many emails from the other members of national platforms, and they are very concerned with the escalation of the situation in Transnistria through Russia. So the question is, would it be possible to get monitoring mission, a civil monitoring mission, to see that there is no attempt to escalate the situation from the main part of the territory of Moldova? Thank you.
Thank you. One more question. We will take one more question, and then I do remember that there were many, many more, but please, one more question, and then we will close it. Yes? And then the answers.
Thank you. I would like to join the previous question, and also I have a separate question to Commissioner Füle. Okay. We were told that from the time of the completing the negotiations on the AA and until initialing, it takes long because there is a legal expertise and there is translation and so on. My question is, why it takes so long from initialing to signature? what if the legal expertise and the translation was done? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, please. There were several questions if you would like to answer. Yeah.
I steal your microphone. By the way, as far as the technical and legal process, you could observe that in the case of Ukraine, it took us almost 2 years. In the case of Moldova and Georgia, we're talking about a much shorter period of the time, doing our utmost in the Commission and in the Council services to deal with this complex treaty, which has just a DCFTA part, has more than 1,000, and it's a legally binding document. I said it's most ambitious treaty the European Union has offered its partner. For sure, not only politicians, but the legal experts, both in the Commission and also in the Council member states, want to be certain about each and every word in each and every language mutation. By the way, the same goes for your countries, okay? Don't underestimate the process between the initialing and signing, because I don't really expect the authorities to consult with the civil society each and every part of the treaty before initialing. It's, after all, the responsibility of authorities to negotiate. But at a certain moment, the text needs to be made public. A certain moment, you need to discuss it. A certain moment, the parliament needs to be involved. A certain moment, civil society will have to say also what they think about this treaty. Concerning Transnistria, the answer is in the intensification of 5+2 on one side, on the other side, negotiations on the status of Transnistria. On the other side, it is about making sure that the benefits of the visa-free regime and association agreement, including DCFTAs, are for all who live on the territory of Moldova, including the people living in Transnistria on the other bank of that river. Now, listen, one thing needs to be clear. The association agreement is a very powerful transformation instrument, but it's not the most powerful, okay? It's second to enlargement, and it is enlargement where the conditionality could work par excellence, and where through the conditionality, through the accession process, you could actually change the things, okay? Because you have the acquis, you have the model, you have the values, you have the principles, and there is no way you let any candidate countries without actually embracing those values and principles and making them work. The partnership, the Eastern Partnership, does not offer us this level of conditionality. That's why it's a set of the incentives. The more the authorities, the more the country wants to get closer to the European Union, the higher the European aspirations are, the bigger value, the bigger importance the conditionality might have. And you have to understand that. Would I like to wish the situation of the political prisoners in Belarus tomorrow? Yes. But my instrument, the instruments of the member states, of the EU institutions, and all other democratic forces are limited. But within that limitations, we're doing our utmost. And one of those issues are those sanctions you referred to. Another issue is the way of we formulate the conditionality. You release the political prisoners, and the sky is the limit. And let's talk about modernizing Belarus, and let's talk about sort of putting it in its place, Europe. It belongs to it and to its citizens. Now, the human rights in Azerbaijan is a matter of our discussions for some time. Now, what we are trying to do is the following. Because there is something what Azerbaijan is interested. There are other things we are interested. And we are now talking about the way how to make our interests to get together. We have the strategic relationship in the energy sector. Why not to extend that strategic partnership in the modernization of Azerbaijan, which would also involve in a strategic way to tackle the human rights, the rule of law, fundamental freedoms. So when we're talking not only about the association agreement with Azerbaijan, but also the operational instrument of it, which we called the Strategic Modernization Partnership, we're making it very clear to Azerbaijan, yes, we're ready to help you with the modernization of your country, okay? Because it has, you have a lot of money, no one is questioning about your ability to put the hardware right. Well, we have software. And without that software, your hardware is not going to work efficiently. And I'm talking not about just the new cities and new buildings. I'm talking about the society. A part of that needs to be a fundamental freedoms element. Without that, we will not move forward. And if I may, the following short thoughts. I'm glad that the last speaker makes a reference to sustainability, because this is where you play a very important role. There's nothing more important, and sorry, Ukraine shows that again. And I could see the challenges in other Eastern partners, where it is not about the will of authorities and the commitment, but it's about the ability to ensure the sustainability of that reform tracks. And this is where you play a tremendously important role of bridging over, where there are the changes through the elections, and the willingness to proceed with the reforms is not the same as it was before. So the sustainability is very important. Now, three new things which this summit, which is to start in a couple of hours, is bringing. First, this is the first summit which is to mark that the structure of the civil society forum, the national platforms, secretariats are done and finished. No more excuses for inaction. There are more money on the table, more support from our side. The time is to work. Point number two, this is also the first summit which is not only going to issue the declaration, but it's also the first summit which puts on the table the concrete results in the sectorial cooperation, the transport, the initialization of the association agreement with Moldova and Georgia, the visa facilitation regimes. All of that is bringing not just a theoretical framework for the civil society involvement, engagement, but a practical substance for engagement. Okay? And it needs to be used. Do I like the direct contacts between the civil society and the Brussels institutions? Yeah, I do. But this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we help you in the structured dialogue with the authorities there, and that there is a more dialogue between civil society in your countries and the European Union member states. I think this is also one of those things we need really to look at it. And that brings me to the last point. Your efforts cannot be anymore, I'm sorry for being plain and spin it a little bit. It has not to be a Brussels-driven anymore. It has to be local civil society-driven. And I think there are conditions for it. and we will make sure, through staying engaged, that we are not just your supporters, but your partners, because we will, more than in the past, make sure that you are not only informed at the end of the process after we negotiate something or start the implementation with authorities of some kind of activities, but we will involve you in that process more and more. The more capacity you're going to have, the more engagement you're going to show, the bigger involvement in those activities are going to be ensured. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you so much. And there was a question about civil society and civic-minded organizations, and I think that that was targeted at Ukraine, so that's why I would appreciate your word. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does it
Thank
work?
you.
Please try. Please.
Thank you for your question. Yes, you mentioned a very painful issue, very painful problem about civil society and civil society organizations. But I think that the best evidence that civil society and civil society organizations can act as a united and very powerful force is today's events in Ukraine, is today's peaceful protest in Maidan, in center of Kiev. Because in Maidan we don't have civil society organizations, we don't have civil society in general, we don't have civil society movement. We have united force which defend European choice of Ukraine. So finally we received a clear goal, which is European integration of Ukraine and signing of association agreement. Finally, we have clear understanding of our mission to bring Ukraine closer to EU. And I think that thanks to this goal and thanks to the understanding of this mission, there will be no more such speculations and manipulations about divisions between civil society organizations. Yes, we are facing a real challenge not to be marginalized, and we are working on that very hard, extremely hard. We don't want to, we really want to avoid a situation which we can observe in Belarus. That's why we keep channels of communications open, both with authority. We still have a lot of adequate people in government, in our Verkhovna Rada, in our parliament, and with opposition. So we have all channels for communications open, and we realize that we have to avoid the Belarusian situation. I mean, to be marginalized.
Okay, I am a political philosopher. I read Tocqueville on civil society, and when I compare with what we have in Georgia, it's very different, of course. But in order to, really dramatically broaden that area, I think I agree with Bruce Jackson that we need more economic transformation and general modernization of society, etc., growing middle class, but that's long term. But now I think, and I agree with Anna, that civil society area, let's say so, that broadens still. It's not already not confined to those people who can write grant applications and address it to George Soros or Nadia Duke or European Commission. It is broader than that, and it's getting broader. So we have different history, different background, so of course our civil society environment is different, but whatever resources we have, we should use them as Ukraine uses it in Maidan right now, but there are lots of causes and lots of challenges and lots of issues where we can make a difference.
Yes, thank you, Professor Nodia. Well, who would like to ask some more questions? Yes, please go ahead.
Valentin Chivotaro, NGO Bios, Moldova. My question is related with what Commissioner Füle mentioned about sustainability. And it was mentioned that civil society is a major factor in transformation, in making changes of attitude. So the question is related, how, in addition to national platform, in addition, what should we have, what tools we should have in order to have genuine participation, due to the fact that it depends on way of involvement of civil society organizations, civil society in all stages of this process and maintaining this process. And my question is, what else should be done in order to involve civil society from the beginning of the process in this process? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take some more. Yes, you and you. There will be 2 more questions, and then...
Thank you so much. My name is Gubat Bayramov. I come from Azerbaijan. Just I would like to give briefly information and ask you support. One of the active member of the national platform, I am the former country facilitator, Anar Mehmetli. He did not able to come here, despite of he was former co-chair first group, and he was invited to the conference. And due to the criminal case, his organization, Election Monitoring and Democratic Center, by the General Prosecutor's Office, his freedom of movement under the restriction. The General Prosecutor's Office sent instruction to the all cross-boarding about the restriction his movement from Azerbaijan to abroad. I would like to ask you, you already now informed about the human rights issues in Azerbaijan, and Ms. Nadia Duke also mentioned 2 main cases. How we can save the democracy in Azerbaijan if some of members under the freedom of movement restriction problem, some other in prison, and there is a lot of problem in the media side, independent media side. I would like also to call all
Please
of
try
you
to wrap it up.
to support
Please don't be too
on our
long.
case. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Please be very brief. Colleagues, time is very precious. One more question. You, very briefly, because there was a lady asking for a word. Yes, very briefly, please.
Участник ликвидации аварии на Чернобыльской АЭС, член комитета Белорусского национального комитета платформы Волчанин Александр. Я бы хотел обратиться к экс-премьер-министру Литвы. Это хорошо, когда вы были во власти и когда вы в оппозиции. Есть время подумать, что вы еще не сделали для Беларуси. И я хотел бы такой вопрос поднять. Мы, белорусы, нам дает ваше посольство только 3 дня побыть у вас, у Вильнюсе. То есть вы нас загоняете в резервацию. То есть не правительство меня не выпускает, вы нас не выпускаете. Решите этот вопрос, чтобы хотя бы для гражданского общества не 3 дня давали, а хотя бы на год давали визу. И еще один коротко вопрос. Фонды должны существовать для организаций, а не организации должны существовать для фондов.
Спасибо, спасибо. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Olena Pristaika from Ukraine. Actually, I don't have a question. I just have a thank words to the panelists and also to the politicians, European politicians in the first session. It was extremely important for the Ukrainian civil society to hear that EU stays committed, that the door is open, and that more efforts will be done in future. And from our side, we will continue our internal work. And what is the most important, that during this last week, we have seen Ukrainian people, and actually the feeling is that no matter what the current, and I underline these words, the current authorities in Ukraine are doing, the historical process has been started. And the destiny has been already decided, and now it's our common work to make it possible. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you so much. And now, colleagues, before I give the floor to our ex-Prime Minister to answer the question concerning Belarus, who would comment on Moldova and Azerbaijan? Who would like to comment briefly? Mr. Jackson? Yeah, that's great.
I didn't hear the question. You know, I want to comment on something Nadia said, but I'll do that later.
Okay, yes. Yeah, please. It works.
No, actually, it works, yes. Since I was the one who mentioned the names of the people who are being threatened with imprisonment and are in prison in Azerbaijan, maybe I should respond as well. I liked very much what Commissioner Füle said about engaging the government of Azerbaijan, because of course this has to be a two-way process. A country has to want to be in Europe in order to be able to, for there to be a relationship. But just more broadly speaking, I think maybe Europe should distinguish a little bit more between the civil society that represents citizens and people who have different ambitions and aspirations from the ones that the government is expressing. And I think this was part of the frustration of our Belarusian colleague here about visas. Maybe visa policies should be reviewed, and maybe some issuing visas to some of the government officials should be reviewed a little bit more stringently. You know, we now have in the United States the so-called Magnitsky Act that does distinguish between officials. And again, look more stringently who the people are. Civil society is one thing, government officials are different. That's the best offer that I can give at the moment, specifically on Azerbaijan too.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that I would ask our ex-Prime Minister to comment on Belarus. It's a very sensitive issue, I guess.
Yeah, we have very interesting questions about visas to Belarusians. Why only for 3 days they are getting visas? Our former Foreign Affairs Minister maybe can explain after in more details, but I do not know all the details, but I think that this is, of course, European regulation and Schengen area regulation. So it does not depend very much on us. But it's absolutely clear how important is really European policy to find a way how to give much more of access to ordinary people of Belarus, of Ukraine, of other countries going to visit Union. Yesterday I had a very interesting conversation with President of World Ukrainian Community. And he presented some very interesting numbers from investigation of opinion polls in Ukraine. Those who ever had a chance to visit European Union, they are supporting membership or let's say accession of Ukraine towards Europe somewhere around of 70 or 80%. Those who never visited, the numbers are much lower. And only 70% of Ukrainians had a single chance to visit Ukraine. So I mean, if Europe wants to have much stronger support of ordinary people in Ukraine and other countries, of those countries becoming closer to Europe, there is a very simple way how to achieve really very important result. Simply to change visa policy towards Eastern Partnership countries. That's very, very clear. Then the question was about funds, I understood funds which are supporting civil society in Belarus and other countries. Of course, that is again very much needed. What was done by different funds till now, it's very much needed looking into the future. Of course, Belarus is a special case. We know very well what you are suffering. We know how brutally administration of today is behaving. And of course, I think that when we're speaking about Belarus and what kind of, how Europe can assist civil society in Belarus, one of the major developments can be achieved if really Europe will be successful with Ukraine. That will change the whole situation, the whole picture, even in Belarus.
Thank you. Does anyone from our panel wish to add something? Because the time is up. Yeah.
Can I just respond to the
Yeah.
couple? I think Nadia raised a really central question in her remarks, when she asked, what language do we speak? Or actually, what language should we speak? I mean, obviously, the language of civil society and a language of altruism and values is important. But at least we learned from American election, you also have to speak the language of the pocketbook issues, where you don't win elections. And it seems to me when we look at, what happened recently, issues of trade, jobs, private property, the structure of capitalism, essentially the language of human possibilities. Russia did a better job explaining that than we did, and those are words that the West invented. And one of the things we have to have, in addition to civil society, let's remind why we want civil society. We don't want a parallel commentariat that just sits there. We want a civil society that grows and produces parties and produces ideas and ultimately produces people in governance. That's what civil society is. It can't comment all its life. I mean, it has to move and transform society. And it's not moving. And so what I think we have to do is connect both the values language, which I think we've got, I think we know that, to basically the human lives and the households. And that's where I think we're not doing quite as well. And I think if the Eastern Partnership ties in with our other institutions, such as the IMF, and prohibits some of these trading activities that have tipped the balance, and we coordinate within our institutions, we can do a better job on that.
Yep, thank you. So I have a very pleasant duty to wrap it up. And very briefly, I would say that, in fact, we discussed many sensitive and important points. And of course, it's very easy for any state to tolerate and even encourage some domesticated, tamed or pocket NGOs, or civil society which is simply confined to some very pleasant groups. But the point is that it's much more difficult to accept the critical voice of your society and to understand that the entire universe of human rights discourse doesn't work, doesn't function without such NGOs as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Freedom House. This is to say that the entire world of liberal democracy is simply dysfunctional without civil society, as simple as that. And that's why it's not a favor. The state is not doing a favor. It simply guarantees its own sustainability and its own future. I deeply appreciate those points made by our speakers. I'm very grateful to Prime Minister Andrius Kubilius, to Mr. Bruce Jackson, to István Gyarmati, to Mr. Mares, Petr Mares, to Nadia Duke. Thank you very much indeed. You are not Vice President of the United States, but still you're a Vice President of crucially important organization.
I can't even
Which
run.
makes a very important difference. And Professor Gia Noria and Alona Gutmanchuk, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much. I thank the audience for wonderful questions, for your engagement, and have a very fruitful and very interesting conference. Thank you.
Okay.